I guess the best place to begin is with the job offer, or how one ends up working nights in a morgue somewhere along a lonely stretch of West Texas. People tend to raise an eyebrow when I say I volunteered for graveyard duty, no pun intended. But the truth is, I didn't have many options left. I'd just been let go from my previous position as an overnight security guard at a shipping warehouse. The company downsized, or so they claimed, though I knew better. We lost a bunch of pallets one evening, and I was the one on watch. Still, there was no proof it was my fault, but corporate rarely needs proof to cut the least senior member of the team. One severance check and a half-hearted apology, and I was out the door. With rent looming, I was desperate. I'd scoured the online classifieds for anything that paid half-decent. My phone was perpetually on silent. Bill collectors had discovered I existed, but I'd peek at it hourly, hoping for a miracle. Over a plate of stale fries in a roadside diner, I stumbled onto a listing tucked at the bottom of an odd jobs forum. Night attendant wanted at Riverview Morgue, Westbridge, Texas. Midnight to 6 a.m. Good pay, benefits optional. Must be comfortable working alone. No experience required. I don't know what possessed me to dial that number right away. Maybe it was the mention of benefits optional, or maybe the single-star rating from some outraged poster who claimed the place was unspeakably cursed. In hindsight, that should have been a red flag. But I told myself it was nonsense, just some internet troll sowing rumors. A calm, almost mechanical voice answered after one ring. Riverview Morgue, it said. Is this about the night position? I cleared my throat. Yes, sir. I'm interested. The voice gave me a brisk set of directions. Be here by 11:15 tonight. Bring identification and any relevant paperwork. The shift would start immediately if we accept you. Sure, I managed, glancing at the clock on my phone. It was already 9:45, and Riverview was on the far side of the county. I'll be there. The line went dead without so much as a goodbye. By 10:30, I was on the road, wrestling with an aging car whose check engine light seemed determined to outshine the Texas stars. The route went through desert scrub and fields gone to dust. After an hour, I turned off onto a secondary road marked only by a sign so faded I had to double-check that I hadn't taken a wrong turn. Riverview Morgue, ironically, had no river in sight, just a flat expanse of land, dotted with mesquite trees, under a sky that looked bruised by the promise of storm clouds. The building itself was a low, rectangular structure with dull white paint flaking in sheets. A single buzzing fluorescent tube over the side entrance was the only sign of life. I arrived at 11:10, heart pounding. I expected an interview or at least a tour of the place, but as soon as I stepped inside, an older man in gray coveralls waved me down a corridor. He wore an ID badge that read Jenkins, though his photograph looked younger than he did in person. Without a smile, he handed me a clipboard of paperwork. Name, address, next of kin, all the usual. Then, almost as an afterthought, he muttered something about how the morgue manager, Mr. Anders, he said, would do a quick orientation. Then Jenkins vanished down the hallway without another word. I stood alone in that institutional corridor. The walls were a bland beige. A clock on the wall ticked with loud determination. 11:13. 2 minutes left until my scheduled meeting. Footsteps echoed somewhere behind me. A stout man in a pressed button-up shirt approached. He wore no tie, but his posture was formal, like he expected a metal pin to his chest any minute. You must be our new hire, he said. I'm Anders, manager here. Not a doctor, just a caretaker, you might say. He extended a hand, which I shook with more force than I intended, nerves jumping in my veins. Anders led me to a cramped office that contained a metal desk, a filing cabinet, and a single fluorescent lamp that hummed like a dying wasp. There wasn't a single window. All right, he said, here's the deal. You'll be alone most nights, handling basic watch, receiving bodies if they arrive after hours, logging them into the system. It's really not complicated. Last night attendant left unexpectedly, didn't give notice. We need someone who won't scare easily. I couldn't imagine anyone wanting to break into a morgue, but Anders gave me no time to question him. He pushed a sheet of paper across the desk. These are the guidelines, he said. Rules for your shift. Read them carefully. Follow them exactly. His tone left no room for debate. I glanced at the list. Some items seemed normal, temperatures to maintain, logs to fill out. But others, not so much. My stomach did a small flip at lines like, if you hear voices from locked drawers, do not open them and no visitors after 2 a.m., no matter who they claim to be. Is this for real? I asked, forcing a laugh. Anders did not smile. If you can't handle it, there's the door. But the pay's good, $25 an hour. You'll clock out at 6, Monday through Friday. I swallowed hard. $25 an hour might as well have been $1 million, given my financial state. So I nodded. All right, I said. I can handle it. He produced a key ring. Good, then let's get you started. That was how I began my first night as an attendant in Riverview Morgue, with nothing but a typed sheet of rules, a manager who seemed more concerned about me not asking questions, and a single flickering light to show me the way. By the time Anders left, I'll be back at dawn, he told me. My nerves hummed like a guitar string tuned too tight. I tried to steady my breathing. I had a small break room of sorts to the left, with a microwave and a coffee maker that had definitely seen better days. The arrangement was Spartan, a battered sofa, a metal table, and a corkboard pinned with random memos about chemical disposal and licensing regulations. But there was something else on that board, a single typed note in bold letters that read, Notice, Cemetery Deliveries. On assigned nights, you will be required to bring a sealed package to the adjacent cemetery. Leave it at the headstone marked Holloway. Do not open the package. Upon your return, you will find the morgue door locked from the inside. This is normal. Knock 3 times to be let in. I blinked at that. What do they mean by cemetery deliveries? The job posting hadn't mentioned anything about running errands to a graveyard after midnight. And why would the door lock itself from the inside? I could already feel my logical mind itching for answers, but the memory of Anders's stony expression held me back. I spent the first hour exploring. There was a main hallway that branched off in 2 directions. One corridor led to a small receiving area where bodies would be wheeled in. The second went past a few offices, including Anders's, and ended at a steel double door labeled cold storage. My passkey opened it. Inside, I found rows of stainless steel compartments, each with a small digital thermometer above the handle. The hum of refrigeration was constant, with an undertone like faint whispering. Or maybe that was just the ventilation system. A desk sat in one corner with a logbook. The pages were lined with neat columns. Name, date of death, time of admission, drawer number. Most of them were scrawled in black pen. Some entries had question marks in place of the date of death. Others had red stamps that read, transferred or pending autopsy. The last few entries were incomplete, like whoever was logging them left in a hurry. Eventually, I decided to check the building's side exit. Sure enough, it led to a narrow path lined by chain-link fence and under an old street lamp that buzzed with the same frequency as the corridor lights inside. The sign said, Oakrest Cemetery Private Entrance. That had to be where these so-called deliveries took place. Better safe than sorry, I thought, stepping back in. I tugged the door shut behind me, rattling the chain on the outside. Then I tested the knob. It was still unlocked. The note said it would lock from the inside after a delivery, which made no sense. Probably some glitch with the security system, I told myself, ignoring the prickle at the back of my neck. I returned to the break room to wait. Midnight came and went quietly, just me and the overhead buzz. At some point after 1 a.m, I heard a soft clang near the receiving area. Heart thudding, I went to investigate. The corridor lights flickered as I approached, revealing a gurney with a plain black body bag on top. No one else was around. The outer doors were locked, I was certain of it. And yet there it was, a brand new arrival. Sweat beaded on my temple. I glanced around for Anders or Jenkins, but the hallway was empty. I steeled myself and unzipped the bag enough to spot the toe tag. Hernandez, Laura. Female, age 56. The cause of death line was blank. I realized I wasn't sure how I was supposed to process a new arrival. The rules on my sheet simply said, Any new body after midnight goes to cold storage. Log the details. No exceptions. So that's what I did. I wheeled the gurney into cold storage, found an empty drawer labeled number 14, and slid the body in. The steel drawer gave a reluctant squeal as it closed. The thermometer overhead read 35 degrees Fahrenheit. I scribbled into the logbook, Hernandez, Laura. Arrived 1:15 a.m. Drawer 14. My handwriting shook with each letter. I turned to leave. That's when I caught a whiff of something behind me, like old flowers, sweet and wilted. For a terrifying moment, I swore I felt a presence hovering near the lockers. But I swung around, and there was only the humming refrigeration unit. Great start, I thought, heart pounding. Great start indeed. I didn't sleep well the next day. My mind replayed the silent arrival of that gurney, the half-sipped body bag, the note about cemetery deliveries. Still, come nightfall, I returned. Anders greeted me briefly, nodded at the logbook, then left before I could voice any questions. That was the pattern. Anders left the building by midnight, Jenkins vanished somewhere too, and the place became mine until dawn. On my second shift, I discovered a more elaborate list of rules taped to the side of the break room fridge. 1. Perform an hourly temperature check of all occupied drawers. If any drawer is above 38 degrees, noted in red ink. 2. If you receive a package labeled Riverview Cemetery, deliver it immediately to the Holloway headstone. Don't open it, don't linger. 3. In the west hallway closet there is a mannequin. If its eyes appear open at any point, do not acknowledge it. 4. Every Sunday, fresh flowers must be placed at the headstone in the courtyard. Your name is on it, so consider it your personal responsibility. 5. If you fail to place flowers by midnight Sunday, you may hear digging sounds beneath your bed. Do not investigate. 6. Keep your phone on silent. Any calls from an unknown number after 2 a.m. are to be ignored. 7. Never sign your name in the ledger more than once per shift. I read that list 3 times, trying to process how bizarre it all sounded. A mannequin in the west hallway closet. A grave with my name on it in the courtyard. I swallowed hard, telling myself it was some bizarre morgue tradition or staff inside joke. But if it was a joke, the tone was unsettlingly serious. At around 2:30 a.m., something else happened. A battered cardboard box appeared on the break room table. It was taped shut and bore a single sticker that said Riverview Cemetery. Deliver ASAP. No sign of who brought it in or when. My spine tingled as I remembered Rule 2. I took the box to the side door. Outside, the night was moonless, the sky heavy with clouds. My breath sounded far too loud in the hush of the yard. I made it halfway across the narrow path before the wind picked up, rustling the chain-link fence. The cemetery gates stood open, creaking on their hinges. Up close, Oakcrest Cemetery was a modest plot of land, rows of worn headstones, a few leaning crosses. I found Holloway near a cluster of yucca plants. The headstone was older, letters softened by time. I placed the package on the ground, feeling a strange compulsion to run. But then I noticed something. A second grave behind it, a plain granite marker with no visible name. The stone was chipped at one corner. A sense of wrongness prickled at my arms, as if something about that nameless headstone beckoned. I stepped closer but froze when a gust of wind rattled the yucca stalks. The temperature felt like it dropped 10 degrees. Something about the air felt occupied. I forced myself to leave. If the rules said don't linger, I wasn't about to test them. The moment I slipped back through the side door, it slammed shut behind me. I twisted the handle. Indeed, it was locked. From the inside, exactly as the note had warned. My pulse hammered. I knocked 3 times hard in my throat. A click, and the door swung open on its own. The corridor beyond was empty. I hurried back to the main hallway, refusing to look over my shoulder. The entire building felt a degree colder. No more deliveries arrived that night, thank God. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something watched me from the corners of the morgue's corridors. On my 3rd night, I decided to investigate the west hallway closet. Curiosity gnawed at me. What was the deal with a mannequin in a morgue? The corridor itself was quiet, lit by a flickering bulb that gave everything a jerky strobe effect. The closet door had a heavy padlock. Odd, why lock up a mannequin? But the padlock was unlatched, just hooked through the hasp. I lifted it off and opened the door. Inside, amid dusty shelves of cleaning supplies, stood a life-sized mannequin. It was the old-fashioned kind, solid plastic limbs, no movable joints, wearing a faded white gown stained with brownish splotches of paint or perhaps old varnish. The eyes were painted shut, the faintest lines indicating eyelids. A wave of relief swept through me. At least it's not actually staring, I thought. I shut the door carefully. Rule 3 had specifically mentioned the mannequin's eyes. If its eyes appear open at any point, do not acknowledge it. Ridiculous or not, the sense of foreboding was enough to make me hurry away. But the next morning, as I was clocking out, I passed that closet door again. The padlock was missing entirely. A breeze from somewhere in the building rustled the door open, an inch. Through the gap, I saw the mannequin was closer to the threshold than before, like it had been moved or maybe stepped forward on its own. No, I told myself, someone's messing with me. Yet the plastic face seemed angled toward the hall, as if listening. Eyes still closed, I noted, pushing the door shut. Every day I slept fitfully, haunted by dreams where I'd see that mannequin in different corners of the morgue, arms outstretched, eyelids slowly lifting. I'd wake up drenched in sweat, half panicked that I'd overslept and missed some crucial detail of the rules. Time started blurring. One night, I found 2 sealed envelopes, each labeled cemetery delivery. Another time, Jenkins appeared at 1 a.m. His expression was vacant as he handed me a locked briefcase with no explanation. I'd always make the trek across to Holloway's headstone, place the items, and hurry back. The door never failed to lock from the inside upon my return. I asked Anders about it once. What exactly am I delivering? I'd ventured, trying to sound casual. He stared at me for a long moment before replying, things that can't stay here. That's all you need to know. The arrangement is old. We maintain it. I didn't press further. There was something about the way he said arrangement that sent a shiver along my spine. My instincts told me I didn't want to know more. By the end of my second week, I'd grown used to hearing odd footsteps in the corridors, or glimpsing shapes in the reflective surfaces of the cold storage drawers. I told myself it was an overactive imagination, that the place was just fundamentally creepy. But deeper down, I sensed there was more, something that the building itself wanted to hide. Late at night, I'd hear faint voices or sobbing from behind locked compartments. Each time, I'd force myself to walk away, heart hammering, remembering the rule about ignoring voices from locked drawers. Occasionally, I'd check on the mannequin in the west hallway closet. Every time, it seemed fractionally closer to the door. Its plastic eyelids remained closed, but I couldn't shake the feeling that one day I'd find them open. The idea alone was enough to keep me wide awake through my shift. It was Anders who showed me the courtyard after I'd been working there about 3 weeks. He pulled me aside at midnight, gesturing for me to follow him through a side door in the cold storage area I hadn't noticed before. It led to a small walled courtyard, a patch of weed-riddled lawn overshadowed by an ancient oak. At the center stood a single headstone. When I saw my name etched across the granite, I nearly stumbled backward. It felt like someone had punched the air from my lungs. My full name with the dates left blank. The stone looked fresh, aside from a faint coat of dust, as though it had been carved recently. "What is this?" I demanded, voice cracking. Anders inhaled slowly, his face impassive. "It is a formality. The ownership here has certain traditions. We place a headstone for each new night attendant, a way to ensure they maintain discipline. You're expected to put fresh flowers here every Sunday. Non-negotiable, that matched Rule 4. Every Sunday, fresh flowers, your name is on it." So it wasn't a joke. The stone was real, cold, and solid under my trembling fingertips. My mouth felt dry. "What if I refuse?" He gave me a thin smile. "Nobody here has ever refused twice." The menace in those words chilled me. I noticed a small marble vase set into the ground beside the stone, containing wilted carnations. "I didn't put those there," I said quietly. He shrugged his shoulders. "One of us did in your stead until now. But from here on out, It's your responsibility. You understand, a draft whispered through the oak leaves, as if the tree itself sighed in pity. I stared at my own name, etched in unyielding stone. Later, I found a short typed note pinned next to the main rules list. Failure to place flowers by midnight Sunday will result in nightly disturbances. It begins with digging sounds under your bed. Then more. I had no intention of testing that threat, as absurd as it sounded. So that Sunday, I made a stop at a local grocery store, grabbed a cheap bouquet of daisies, and placed them in that little marble vase. I'm not superstitious, but my skin crawled the entire time. I felt eyes on me, maybe from the building's upper windows, or maybe from that unnamed presence that seemed to lurk in every corridor. Nothing happened that night. No digging, no nightmares beyond the usual. Still, the knowledge that a grave existed with my name hammered home that I was in over my head. The shifts continued. Odd deliveries arrived with no apparent schedule. The cold storage compartments felt colder. Jenkins spoke even less, drifting around corners like a ghost. At times, I caught a glimpse of his reflection and thought I saw bruises on his neck, but he always vanished before I could ask questions. One Wednesday, around 3 a.m., I heard a whispering noise in the main hallway, like a conversation in hushed tones. When I approached, the talking stopped, replaced by the echo of my own footsteps. Then from behind me, a single word hissed, "Stay." I spun around, adrenaline roaring in my ears. There was nobody there. Yet the corridor seemed darker, as though a shadow had passed. The faint smell of old flowers returned, that sweet, rotting scent. I recognized it from the night I brought in the first body. After that incident, I decided to systematically check each corridor, hoping to find a rational explanation, maybe an air vent or a misfiring generator. A squeaky floor tile. Anything that was normal. Instead, I found something else, a narrow utility room behind a rarely used restroom. The door was ajar, revealing a tangle of cables, cleaning supplies, and a battered fold-out table. On that table lay a black binder stuffed with documents. I looked around. The place was silent, so I opened the binder. The first page was a roster of names, some with red X's, some circled in blue. The next pages contained photos of headstones, including some in the courtyard. My pulse jumped when I saw an image of my marker, daisies in the marble vase. Next to it, handwritten notes, flowers placed, Sunday, 11:49 p.m., and no disturbances reported. I flipped more pages. The final entry labeled, Night Attendant. Jacob Nelson included a short line, terminated after repeated violations, stone removed. My hands shook. Terminated sounded dangerously vague in this context. Did that mean fired or something else? A faint rasp behind me made me snap the binder shut. The corridor was empty, but I felt an unmistakable presence. Heart pounding, I replaced the binder exactly as I found it and slipped back into the hallway. The next day, I arrived early to find Anders waiting. He seemed agitated, pacing near the break room. "We had a power surge in the west hallway," he said, thrusting a flashlight at me. "Lights are out there. Go check the mannequin closet, make sure it's secure." My skin went cold. The mannequin. I recalled the instructions about ignoring it if its eyes opened. Did Anders suspect something had changed? I made my way down the dim corridor. My steps echoed unnaturally, each footfall magnified by the hush. The closet door gaped wide. No padlock in sight. The overhead bulb was indeed dead, so I flicked on the flashlight, the beam slicing through dusty air. The mannequin was standing in the center of the closet, as though it had walked there by itself. One pale plastic arm reached forward. The eyelids, still painted shut, but were they always parted that hairline fraction? It looked like a crack ran along one of the lids, hinting at the possibility of an open eye beneath. My throat tightened, remembering the rule: if its eyes appear open, do not acknowledge it. For several heartbeats I just stared. The sense of a presence behind those painted lids made my scalp prickle. Gathering my nerve, I nudged the mannequin back against the wall, ignoring how the plastic seemed warmer than it should be. Then I eased the door shut, shoved a nearby chair under the knob as a makeshift lock, and hurried off. That night, every time I passed that corridor, I heard a faint tap tap tap, as if plastic fingers were rapping on the inside of the closet. I refused to investigate. My memory hammered the rule: do not acknowledge it. It was on a quiet Thursday, weeks into this twisted routine, that I learned about betrayal the hard way. Jenkins approached me in the break room around 1:30 a.m., his eyes darting nervously. He whispered that he had something urgent to discuss. We ended up in the small utility room, the same one with the binder. Jenkins's voice was hushed, his words tumbling out faster than he could control. He told me he'd been working at Riverview longer than Anders, that the real owner of the morgue was never around in daylight, only sending instructions by phone or in sealed envelopes. Jenkins insisted the morgue was a front for something older and more disturbing, a deal that let the building feed off certain energies from the deceased. The bizarre rules, the deliveries, the grave with my name, they were all part of maintaining a precarious balance. He claimed Anders was no mere caretaker, but a willing participant in some supernatural pact. He'll do anything, Jenkins hissed. Anything to keep the arrangement going. That's why your name's on a stone out there. You're the newest piece on the board. My head spun. Why are you telling me this? Because I'm leaving, Jenkins said, voice trembling. I can't stay another day. And I don't want you caught in his web. He pressed a folded slip of paper into my hand. This is a phone number. Belongs to someone who can help. Show them what you've seen. The deliveries, the mannequin, everything. Before I could say another word, we heard footsteps in the hallway. Jenkins's eyes widened. He shoved me aside, stepping into the corridor with an air of feigned nonchalance. Anders appeared, arms crossed, glaring at Jenkins. In that moment, I realized Anders had likely overheard enough to suspect a conspiracy. My stomach knotted. Jenkins stammered something about verifying a new body arrival, but Anders fixed him with a cold stare. I slipped out the side door, the folded paper clutched in my sweaty palm. My mind reeled. Was Jenkins telling the truth? Could I really trust him? I didn't get the chance to ask. The next night, Jenkins never showed up. Anders simply said, he is no longer here. Decided the job wasn't for him. But from the tightness in Anders's voice, I suspected Jenkins's departure wasn't voluntary. That Sunday, I brought lilies to my grave marker, trying to cover up my anxiety with more expensive blooms, as if that would help. As I bent to place them in the marble vase, I saw fresh soil strewn around the base of the stone, like something had been digging. My gut tightened. I pressed the flowers into the vase and rushed inside. No more messing around, I decided. I'm calling that number Jenkins gave me. In the break room, I used the landline phone. My cell had no signal in the building, or so it claimed. The number rang twice, then a woman's voice answered. Hello. I introduced myself hesitantly, explaining that Jenkins had given me her number. There was a long silence. Then she asked, have you heard it? The digging under the bed. The footsteps that come for you if you ignore the flowers. My heart pounded. No, I've placed them every time. But I've seen other things. The deliveries, the mannequin, she cut me off. It's all connected. This morgue isn't just about storing bodies. It's an anchor for something else. Don't trust Anders. When the time comes, you must run. Don't look back. Before I could ask more, the line crackled and died. I was left trembling, phone in hand. If Jenkins had called this woman a helper, why was her message so bleak? That same night, I couldn't resist checking the west hallway closet again. I found the door open. The mannequin was gone. A pit formed in my stomach as I scoured the corridors. Finally, I saw it standing at the far end of the hall near the courtyard door. And this time its eyes were open. Its plastic eyelids were parted wide, revealing empty sockets. My breath caught in my throat. Do not acknowledge it, the rules said. But how could I ignore something like that? I took a step back, averting my gaze. The overhead lights flickered. Darkness swept over the hall for half a second. When the light returned, the mannequin was closer by several feet, head tilted. The corners of its painted mouth seemed upturned now, almost a grin. Rational thought left me. I sprinted for the break room, forcing myself not to look back. The overhead lights continued to pulse. I half expected the mannequin to be behind every corner. When I reached the break room, I slammed the door shut and barricaded it with a chair. Then I heard it, a slow scraping sound in the hallway, like plastic feet dragging on tile. My heart hammered. The rules warned never to address it if its eyes opened. So I kept silent, lungs heaving as the scraping drew closer. The handle jiggled once. Then there was just silence. I spent the next 2 hours locked in the break room, adrenaline surging through me. Near dawn, the corridor fell quiet. Summoning courage, I stepped out, half expecting to see the mannequin waiting. But it was nowhere in sight. I walked the building in a daze, checking the morgue compartments like a sleepwalker. In the cold storage area, I found drawer 14, where I'd placed Laura Hernandez weeks ago, pulled open an inch. The toe tag dangled off the side. Something compelled me to look inside, though fear twisted my gut. I slid the drawer open. It was empty. My breath caught. Another missing corpse. I rifled through the logbook. No mention of a transfer or autopsy. Just my entry from that night, scrawled in shaky letters. Then, at the bottom of the page, an unfamiliar note in bright red ink. Occupant 14 relocated by management. No further record required. I rechecked every occupant's drawer. Half of them were empty, despite the ledger stating they should be occupied. Others had no names on the toe tags, just blank pieces of paper. Everything felt orchestrated, controlled by Anders or whomever he answered to. I recalled Jenkins's words. He'll do anything to keep the arrangement going. Around 6, Anders reappeared, a satisfied look on his face. "You look tired," he commented. "We might have to get you a new cot if you're not resting well." I forced a tight-lipped smile, determined not to reveal my growing suspicions. He placed a folder on the reception desk. "There's an inspection due next week," he said. "We'll need everything tidy and up to code." As if on cue, I saw a flash of movement near the west hallway. Could it have been the mannequin? My pulse kicked, but Anders didn't seem to notice. He just strolled away, whistling tunelessly. I realized I'd never seen him so pleased. That evening, I arrived an hour early, determined to find answers. I discovered another key on Jenkins's old key ring that I hadn't tested, a small, brass one. I tried it on various locks until I found a match, the door to a basement staircase near the receiving bay. The sign read "Authorized personnel only." I descended carefully. The flickering light overhead illuminated a short corridor ending in an old wooden door. Inside lay a cramped room with dusty shelves, scattered boxes, and a single overhead light that sputtered. In the center, I saw a circle of chairs. There were 8 of them. Each chair faced an empty steel table. Photos lined one wall, group pictures of people I recognized, Jenkins, Anders, and 4 or 5 others, some wearing old-fashioned suits. In each photo, a mannequin stood in the background, half hidden behind the group. My stomach churned. On the table lay a slim ledger. I opened it to find page after page of cryptic notes, dates, times, references to deliveries, adjustments, and renewals. Each year a date was circled, mid-October. We were in September now. I felt ice in my veins. Annual renewal completed. 1 occupant offered, read a notation from 3 years ago. Another from last year, renewal successful, occupant 19. The occupant's name wasn't listed. I set the ledger down, reeling. Was the morgue sacrificing living bodies? Footsteps above me made me freeze. I heard Anders's muffled voice. "We'll see if he keeps asking questions," he said, tone flat. A second voice responded, but I couldn't make out the words. I stood there, heart thundering until the footsteps receded. I realized then that Jenkins's disappearance might be connected to these annual renewals. My mind raced. If the date was approaching, maybe I was next. I recalled the grave with my name, the vacant compartments, the ephemeral deliveries. I have to get out of here, I thought. That night, a thunderstorm rolled across the Texas plains. Rain battered the morgue's roof, lightning flashing so bright it lit up entire corridors. At 2 a.m., I heard the phone ring in the break room, an unknown number. According to the rules, calls from unknown numbers after 2 a.m. must be ignored. But something in me snapped. I answered anyway. Static hissed, then a distorted voice. "You will not escape, occupant," before suddenly the line went dead. Shaking, I slammed the receiver down. "Ignore it," I told myself, repeating the rule like a mantra. "Just get through the night." Then the power cut out, plunging the building into darkness. Emergency lights flickered on in harsh red. Thunder boomed, shaking the windows. I grabbed a flashlight, heart hammering. There was a hammering at the front entrance, someone pounding madly. My instincts told me not to open the door, but I forced myself to look through the small wire mesh window. It was Jenkins, soaked by the downpour, eyes wide with terror. He shouted something I couldn't hear over the wind. With a mixture of relief and fear, I unlocked the door. He stumbled in, water pooling at his feet. "They're after me," he rasped. I tried to run. I got as far as the bus station, but the ticket machine froze and every exit was blocked. Lightning lit up the corridor, revealing a form behind Jenkins, Anders. He appeared from the shadows, face grave. "Welcome back," he said quietly, eyes flicking between us. "I expected you'd come crawling." Jenkins backed up, trembling. "You can't force me into the renewal." Anders shook his head. "You broke contract. Now it demands compensation. You both have meddled." He shot me a look that felt like a dagger. "And if Jenkins won't pay the price, you will." Then, before I could react, the corridor lights flickered again. The mannequin stood behind Anders, eyes fully open, sockets dark and hollow. Jenkins cried out. I stumbled backward. Anders stared at the mannequin as if it were an old ally. A low moan echoed from the cold storage area, as if multiple voices were howling in unison. Doors slammed up and down the hallway. Rain pounded, and my flashlight flickered, illuminating water seeping from under the storage room door, dark, sluggish water that reeked of old flowers. Anders advanced on Jenkins, who fumbled for something in his coat, a small revolver. "Stay back," he warned. Anders didn't flinch. Jenkins fired once. The shot echoed as Anders staggered, but kept moving. A bloom of crimson spread on his shirt. I felt my stomach churn at the smell of gunpowder and blood. The mannequin's grin stretched impossibly wide. Its plastic arms reached around Anders, as if in an embrace. Jenkins screamed, stumbling toward me. "Get out," he yelled. "Get out now." We raced down the hallway, water rising around our ankles from some unknown source. Doors banged open and shut on their own. The entire building seemed to tilt, as if we were inside a sinking ship. A door to the courtyard was slightly ajar. I made a beeline for it, Jenkins panting behind me. Behind us, Anders let out a twisted laugh, followed by a wet gurgle. The mannequin's face was near his shoulder, as if whispering in his ear. Then lightning flared, and the corridor went black for a few seconds. When the light returned, Anders was gone, so was the mannequin. We burst into the courtyard. Rain pelted the ground, turning the dirt to mud around my headstone. The lilies I'd placed were scattered, petals drenched. Jenkins tugged at my sleeve. "We have to keep moving." We stumbled around the building's perimeter, searching for the gate that led to the cemetery. We found the gate hanging half off its hinges, battered by the wind. Beyond it lay the cluster of headstones, including Holloway's. Dim lightning revealed that the unnamed marker behind Holloway's now stood broken in half. We rushed inside, the mud sucking at our shoes. Every so often, I caught glimpses of shapes moving among the gravestones, human silhouettes, stooped figures. My mind reeled. Are those bodies from the morgue? Jenkins cursed, nearly slipping. "They're drawn to the renewal," he muttered. "The energy fuels them," lightning strobed. This time it was closer. I saw it was indeed the reanimated dead, pallid forms, blank eyes, each trailing water or soil behind them. A wave of horror crashed over me. Jenkins and I pressed forward, ducking behind tombstones when possible. The reanimated seemed mindless, shambling with some unknown purpose. We reached Holloway's headstone. A single package lay there, soaked through, label smeared. Jenkins grabbed my arm. "That's it," he hissed. "They'll try to anchor you with it." I had no idea what he meant, but primal fear told me to push on, to get away from that cursed place. A shriek tore through the storm, the sound of metal scraping. Then I saw Anders again, looming a few yards away, clutching his wounded side. The mannequin was at his shoulder, its grin devouring half its face, arms outstretched. "You can't run," Anders spat. "This place demands an occupant. One of you has to stay." Jenkins aimed his revolver again, but water sloshed around him, making it impossible to get a steady shot. Anders laughed, a broken, choking sound, and stepped closer. The reanimated forms converged behind him, forming a ghastly backdrop. I realized that if we didn't escape now, we'd end up in one of those cold storage drawers ourselves. Or worse, buried under our own headstone. "I'm not dying here," I told myself, summoning every ounce of willpower. A flicker of movement drew my eye. The woman I'd delivered, Laura Hernandez, was among the reanimated, her toe tag flapping. She lunged at Jenkins, knocking the gun from his hand. He yelped, staggering back. Anders seized the opportunity, rushing forward. But I grabbed a loose piece of broken headstone and swung, striking Anders in the arm. He hissed in pain, stumbling away. Lightning crashed, revealing a path to the side fence. Jenkins and I scrambled for it. A decaying occupant blocked the way, but Jenkins' shoulder rammed it aside. I kicked at another figure, my breath ragged, adrenaline surging. We squeezed through the fence. The storm hammered us. Behind us, Anders' voice echoed, "You can't escape the morgue's claim." The reanimated forms reached for us, moaning. We ran, hearts pounding, with no idea where we were headed. We dashed across a desolate lot behind the morgue, tripping over debris and lumps of clay-like soil. The storm showed no sign of letting up. We paused under a skeletal tree, gasping for breath, hoping to get our bearings. "What now?" Jenkins panted, clutching his side. Blood trickled from a shallow cut on his forehead. I stared at him, mind spinning. "We keep going. We find a road." Lightning revealed a single-lane path behind an old stone wall, perhaps leading to the main highway. Jenkins nodded, his eyes full of desperation. We stumbled forward, water splashing around our ankles. But as we rounded the corner, a figure blocked the path, tall, motionless, arms out to the sides. Once again, it was the mannequin. Its eyelids were fully open now, black voids set into a featureless plastic face. My pulse jumped into my throat. Jenkins let out a ragged sob. The mannequin stepped toward us, or rather glided, its feet barely touching the ground. Rain slid off its plastic skin. Jenkins grabbed my arm. "Don't speak to it," he whispered. "Remember the rule. Don't acknowledge its eyes," but it was too late. My gaze was locked on those dark sockets. A wave of nausea slammed me. I felt a pressure in my skull, like claws raking at my mind. The mannequin's grin seemed to widen, the corners of its mouth splitting the plastic. Thunder boomed, drowning out the chattering of my teeth. We took a step back, intending to circle around. But Anders emerged on the other side, staggering, an unnatural gleam in his eyes. Blood coated his hand from the bullet wound. He angled to block our escape, the storm swirling around him. "It's over," he rasped. "The morgue always gets what it wants. This place is older than all of us." My heartbeat drummed in my ears. We were trapped between the mannequin and Anders, the reanimated corpses shambling somewhere behind. Jenkins clenched his fists, desperation carved into his features. Rain lashed at our faces like needles. Then a jagged bolt of lightning struck the ground just a few yards away, throwing us off balance. For a heartbeat, white light blinded me. Then, when I regained my vision, I saw something impossible. The ground had split open near the tree, revealing an underground cavity. The hole gaped like a hungry mouth, dirt crumbling at the edges. Anders lunged, arms outstretched, but the saturated soil gave way beneath him. He slid toward the hole, letting out a strangled scream. Jenkins and I scrambled back. The mannequin stood at the lip of the chasm, unmoving, its hollow eyes fixed on Anders as he fell into the darkness. His scream abruptly cut off. Rain pelted the opening, turning it into a muddy pit. I caught a glimpse of shifting shapes in the shadows below, like a writhing mass. Then the ground collapsed further, swallowing the whole, burying Anders' final echoes. Jenkins and I stood there, breathing in ragged gasps. The mannequin's plastic face turned toward us. Its expression was unreadable, but I felt it was studying us, deciding something. Thunder rolled overhead. For a moment, time froze. Suddenly, the mannequin jerked backward, disappearing over the edge into the collapsing pit with no resistance. A final, terrifying grin seemed etched on its face. Then it, too, vanished beneath the swirling mud, swallowed by the earth. The storm hammered on, wind shrieking through the vacant space where Anders once stood. We could hardly believe what we'd seen. Did that just happen? Jenkins whispered. I was too stunned to answer. The reanimated corpses were gone, and the courtyard was blocked by ruin. The morgue itself loomed behind us, windows dark. Everything felt impossible, like the building had devoured its own caretaker and the monstrous mannequin in one final act of desperation. We limped away, helping each other climb over the battered fence. The highway eventually came into view, headlights of distant cars flickering through the downpour. Relief surged, but as we reached the shoulder, a cold certainty gripped me. The morgue wasn't done with us. We'd broken its rules, sabotaged its renewal. Such a place wouldn't let us go so easily. I turned to Jenkins, about to suggest we find help, maybe the state troopers. But then I froze. A flicker of movement reflected in a puddle near our feet. In that reflection, I saw the faint outline of a figure behind us, a shape in a drenched gown, face partially obscured with empty eye sockets. Lightning flashed overhead. I whirled around, but whatever that thing was, it was no longer there. Jenkins grabbed my shoulder, eyes wide with the same terror. We both knew something was still out there, even if it wasn't Anders or the walking corpses. The morgue's presence lingered, seeping into the very air. Without a word, we stumbled toward the nearest sign of civilization, hearts pounding. Maybe the next town over would have a motel, maybe a phone we could use to call that mysterious contact again. But inside, I felt an unsettling awareness. No matter how far we ran, the morgue had claimed us. A grave already bore my name, after all. And as we turned one last time to see if the building was still visible through the rain, a single red light blinked in the distance, like a final wink or a beckoning summons. In that flicker, I heard a faint scraping, like plastic on pavement, resonating across the storm-lashed plain. Something was still following us. That's the end of today's story. If you enjoyed the video, subscribing to my channel would help me out more than you can imagine. I appreciate you, and I'll see you soon.